One type of graph that we can use to visualize a data set is called a line plot. Now, a line plot is a great data visualization or a great graph because it helps us see the shape and spread of our data in a very visual way. So if we were to have a data table that had all of our data values, we could then use a line plot to see any patterns within or shape within that data set. So if you would just go ahead and pause the video and write down this definition here along the bottom, or we can, it's not really a definition, it's more of a purpose. We can describe our data set based on its shape and spread. Okay, and I will explain what that means here. Okay, so you'll notice that this has one axis, so this is basically like an x-axis, and with a line plot, sometimes it'll show a y-axis and sometimes it won't. So if it doesn't, basically it just means each one of these dots represents one value, and sometimes it'll be shown there. Well, then it will say 1, 2, 3 like that, but a lot of times it's just self-explanatory there. So what you'll see here along the x-axis, if this is the heart rates of students, this would then be the data set from when you guys did your heart rate exploration. So we can see that there is a basic shape of where the data values are. So we can see, for example, the value 66. There were 1, 2, 3 students that had 66 beats per minute, whereas there was 1, 2 students that had an average heartbeat of 64 beats per minute. All right, so if we were to just look at this, based on the shape and spread, we could see that we have a cluster of data points here, meaning the majority of our data points kind of fall in this general area, with a few this way and then a few that way. When we say that something there is a cluster of it, there isn't just like a hard definition or cut off what would constitute as a cluster. You just are kind of eyeballing it, getting a feel of where the most data points can fall. Then you would say that this here, the number 68, this would be a peak in our data set. You can also think of it as the mode. It's the one that occurs most frequently. So which one of the data values is the most common that showed up? So that would be called a peak. You then also can look for the highest data value. We call this the maximum. And then you'd also want to identify the lowest data value. We call this the minimum. Okay, so then that shows us the general shape and then the spread. We can also identify, in the same way we've identified a cluster there, we could say that there is a gap in our data set there. Like there's a hole, like there's just no data values there. And then you'll see that this one, our minimum, notice how it is on the other side of this gap. It's totally out by itself. We would call a point like this, we'd call that an outlier. Meaning like it's totally different than the other data values. Like all of these ones kind of make sense. They all are kind of together, whereas you have this guy over here. And you might have an outlier on the low side, or you might have an outlier on the high side. It just kind of depends. All right, now one last thing that's important when we're describing the shape and spread of a data set is we might look at the range. So what is then the difference between that maximum and minimum? So we would say the maximum value minus the minimum value is equal to the range. And we'll go ahead and highlight that. So in this case, 72 is the maximum and 52 is the minimum. So 20 is going to be our range for this data set. So 20 beats per minute is the range. All right, I think that pretty much covers everything that you need to know for a line plot.